To everybody for coming. I hope everybody can see. We've got multiple screens here because we have a very technical person for a change. Not me. You wouldn't want me to try that. Okay, so we have cards going around today. Many of you know maybe we lost Jean Buckner, 103 years old. And she was such a credit to the Historical Society. If you go to the other building, so much of her work is there, different paintings and things, and she was just a joy and a wonderful person, as I know you know. We also have a birthday card going around for Joy Eve, and it's her 87th birthday. 87th birthday coming right up. We did send her a get well card, I think a week ago, but she's looking forward to making it to her 87th birthday, and I think she's in Mill Valley now. Wanted to thank everybody who helped with our garage sale, everybody who donated, everybody who shopped, everybody who helped in any way. Nancy and Mary were our chairman, and they're here today. Did a great job. I want to thank also Lana and Karen Ganser and the gents and just anybody that helped so much with the garage sale. We don't have an exact total yet, but we know it's about $4,000, so that is pretty awesome.
We also need people to help haul things away.
It
isn't over.
There's not too much left out there, though. Have you been out there?
I was there yesterday, or Sunday.
Oh, okay. I thought it was pretty empty.
Oh, yeah, you didn't go to the back.
Okay, so you all know that we have our scrap drive, and I'm just saying there is a beautiful slide out there, a slippery slide, like from a, and we know that it came from Cardinal School. It's in beautiful.
Are you sure it didn't come from the Methodist Church?
I was told it came from Cardinal School, but maybe you know something I don't.
I don't know. They haul stuff out there, a swing set and stuff on Saturday morning.
Okay, maybe I had that information. It's very, very nice slide. I hate to see it go to scrap. There's steps. It's an industrial size. It's not just a little playground thing. So it just, if you know of anybody, a school, anybody who might want that, I would like to see it put to good use. I also want to tell you quickly that we had a really special thing on Monday at the Pennygroff Machine Shed. Phil Gent, he deserves so much credit. And for those of you who haven't been through the Pennygroff Machine Shed on the fairgrounds recently, he spent much of the morning, maybe much of the day, over there with a person from Rural Heritage Magazine. A lot of you farmers know about Rural Heritage Magazine. Phil thought that they were coming to take pictures and do a story for their magazine. Actually, they were filming for their TV show, which I think is RFD, okay. Anyway, it's going to be both. But he said, oh, there's a lot of things here. It's enough for 2 programs, and we know it's going to be sometime in September that they'll be showing that. And that's just a real credit, I think, to our machine shed, and certainly to Phil Gent, who does such a good job of making that happen. Also, right now, or pretty soon, in another 15 or 20 minutes, we have a tour going on at the other building. 40 kids from the summer reading program are going to be there, and so Don Wentworth and Phil and Kathy Bailey and Kara are doing that tour of the building. Then in 2 weeks we're going to have another tour, summer reading program. About 40 kids from Andrew School will be here going through everything, so that's really nice. And then I want to tell you quickly that next week's Brown Bag Lunch is going to be A.J. Schultz. Some of you know AJ. He's from the Iowa Flower Market that now is a Ron Ann's, that was Ron Ann's for so many wonderful years. He's going to be coming and doing our program. He's going to be talking about edible landscaping, I believe, and some things like that. But I talked to him on the phone several times. He sounds delightful, and I know you will enjoy that program. So I'm really...
Can I say something?
Please.
I just want to thank Bonnie. This afternoon she is going to be one of our judges at the rhubarb contest at the farmer's market.
I am, and I'm excited. Because I love rhubarb. And I have some in my backyard. Anybody's welcome to just drive in the driveway and help themselves. Thelma.
I'll help you.
Okay. It should be awesome. Okay, I'm so excited that we're gonna have this neat program now by Ray Scott. I did not know he was this dairy farmer. I am so impressed because I love farmers. So I just think that is so neat. He grew up in Lost Nation.
Correct.
He graduated from school in Lost Nation, and he has deep, deep roots in Jackson County. And so he's going to talk to us about Pence Cemetery, and I thank him so much.
You're welcome.
You want this up here?
Yeah, I'll do the same.
Okay, thank you.
So hi.
Hi.
Nice to see everyone come out today, and I know so many, and Dennis and Wendy came, and Roger Stewart's here, and they're all my friends.
Put up your speaker.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Better. All right. So without haste, I will start the program. Is that screen light enough, or do you want the lights out? This is an interactive program. Interactive program. You can interrupt me at any time. If I can jump from one computer to the other, and we will do Find a Grave, Act online, and I also have Ancestry.com. So if anybody wants to know a little information more about your family, we'll stop the presentation and pick it up. Or we can hold your questions to the end, and we can look at that again. So here we go. So this is my talk today, because this is the beginning of a 2-day program. We're going to have an actual cemetery walk of the Pence Cemetery on Saturday. I think 1 o'clock would be an appropriate time. And so, as the 2 headstones here show, David Scott, my 3rd great-grandfather, is buried there. And one of his friends that allowed him to be in Baldwin was Solomon Pence, the originator of the cemetery itself. So, introduction to myself again. This is my son Matthew, my daughter Melissa, my wife Colleen Hansen, who also grew up in Elwood, and myself. And I am the son of Henry and Mary Scott. So Jack knows them. And Dad was always good about promoting dairy products, if I recall, and he went around getting ads for the annual dairy banquet. They have both moved on to a better home, and they are buried in the Lost Nation Cemetery. Highlights of my life. This is the farm that I grew up at in north of Lost Nation. When I graduated high school, we were still living there.
How many of those buildings are still there?
I'll get there. That's another view of the same farm taken in 1869 while we were living there. The previous photo was taken in 1956, the year I was born, but we did not move to that farm until '63, and it was owned by O.J. Bowman at the time we rented it, and we lived there 13 years. You can see that we're farmers. It's my brother Lauren in the tall cap, my younger brother Lyle, and myself holding the pig, and of course, my first dairy cow. Today the farm is being renovated because there are no buildings. The 260-acre farm has been purchased by the DNR, and they turned it over to the Clinton County Conservation Board, and they made it into the Lost Nation public hunting area. And we moved from that farm, we went to this farm, which was a family farm south of Elwood, and my brother Lyle and Brenda live there today. And this is the farm that I live on in Wisconsin and milk my cows. So, one of the reasons I wanted to do this program on Pence Cemetery is not just because of a heritage there, but for honoring Junior Scott, Dennis's father and mother. As I mentioned in the news release prior to this, that when I met Florence McCandy from Lost Nation, and she wanted me to go to the Pence Cemetery to find David Scott's headstone, she warned me that it will be very difficult to find because it's under the grass, in the bushes, on top of the hill of the cemetery that nobody took care of. Is that pretty much right, Dennis?
I'm still in awe of how you got Dad to smile. I'm still there.
I just think all that, I'm in awe that my mother saved so many clippings that you're...
Yes, I do think you're correct.
And so, in this particular article, your dad, or Junior Scott as we knew him, was looking for the veterans buried in the cemetery. I personally do not know the outcome of that event, but he continued to work the cemetery and make it what it is and what we get to see on Saturday, how it developed into a beautiful cemetery. So, I'm sure he had his hands in the stonework of this name of the Pence Cemetery. Well, Dennis and we're distant cousins, but we all started here in Jackson County near Baldwin by a man named David Scott, and there's been stories and books written about him already, but I wanted to share again this painting that was done for Irving Penningross when we had a Scott reunion in '96 here at the museum on the fairgrounds. This picture is depicting Joshua Beer and David Scott running a deer into a hole in the ground, which we now know has made into Maquoketa Cave State Park. David Scott and a group of people in 1836 came from Indiana to Davenport. And the only way you could cross the Mississippi River at that time was by a ferry, and that ferry was owned by Benjamin Clark. And more history on Benjamin Clark was the fact that he was a captain in the Black Hawk War, but not here in Iowa. He was a captain in the war working with Henry Dodge, capturing Black Hawk, where I live in Darlington, Wisconsin. After the war, he came back to Davenport to set up his ferry in 1832. 4 years later, David Scott and these people opened up the land in Iowa, Scott County, Clinton County, Jackson County. And David Scott met the Pence brothers, who said, make way to Jackson County, come to Baldwin, because we have land available to purchase. And David Scott did that very thing. He was already married and had several children. They ended up giving his wife, Holly Skinner Scott, gave birth to 14 children, 10 of which of those reached maturity and had children. A few of the ones that did not are buried at the Pence Cemetery, and I believe a couple are buried in Indiana before they came here. This stone was created for the David and Holly Skinner Scott family reunion. We don't have an actual picture of David Scott, but we do have a photo of Holly Skinner. Holly Skinner was married at the age of 14 in Indiana in 1818. And we did not know the history of that, but I'm going to share that today, is that they traveled by family. She did not just come with her husband, she came with her brother. So here the pictures here are of David and Holly's son, Joseph. Joseph Scott was born in Indiana, and he married a woman in Baldwin named Sarah Zook. That's a common name in that area too. And they produced 5 sons. ones that we are familiar with here in Jackson County would be my great-grandfather Silas Scott, and the gentleman back here is one named Lafayette. And Lafayette continued to live in Clinton County in Brookfield Township, and Silas, after his time living in western Iowa, came back to buy the Scott farm in Lost Nation that I'm so familiar with. And this is a picture of the Silas Scott descendants that were available for this picture in 1996. You can see it was at the Historical Society. Again, that is Joseph Scott. He had a younger brother named Marion. And Marion was married twice and had this group of children. Marion is buried at the Pence Cemetery with his 2 wives and many children. And this is Dennis's great-grandfather. Correct?
You might need one more great in there, but.
No, you're the same generation that I am.
Okay.
David Scott's your 3rd grade. Again, I have to mention in this photo that I came across that Florence McCandy was a historian in Lost Nation that many of us know about. But the interesting thing was that Florence McCandy's daughter, Jean, married Tom Scott from Baldwin. So she had history in her own mind of how she wanted to remember Tom's family. So we have Florence McCandy, Jean. Jean is 96, still living in Lost Nation on her own. And this is her son Hal and the great-grandson Jared. I was so happy to find that post for this presentation. So now we'll shift gears to the other person who helped find the Makokada Caves. His name was Joshua Beer. He had his family, again, came from Indiana. His wife had already passed away, and he brought along his children. I believe there were 6 of them, but I've only been able to trace it so we can find 4. But something new to me in the last year was the fact that Joshua Beer is buried at the Pence Cemetery, but he was married to this woman. He had a spouse, and they were married in Jackson County, October 14th, 1858. She too was a widow. And how I found this out is because north of the farm in Lost Nation where I grew up, I helped Uncle Ed Moore restore a cemetery that today we know is the Washington Cemetery. Well, in that cemetery is buried this woman's daughter by the name of Ruby. And when I was doing my research on that, it showed her mother had married Mr. Beer. Unbelievable. When the Beers and the Pences and the Scotts all came to Baldwin, they had to make the road, their own road. They had to come from Illinois to Buffalo, Iowa, and up the trail past the Wapsie River, again on a ferry, and then by land they had to make it all the way to Baldwin. Solomon Pence headstone. The middle headstone is Solomon's first wife, and excuse me, and the other headstone is a wife named Hannah, which is Joshua Beer's daughter. So I never knew those connections before. headstone here is of Joseph Skinner, which is also Holly Skinner Scott's brother. He too married Jane Beer Skinner. That is another daughter of Joshua Beer. This is their son James Skinner's headstone, we'll find out there. I don't know why they did not encarve his name on the stone, but he is buried there with his wife. Their daughter, I don't have it in the slides here, but just for inclusion in the story, that their daughter married Harvey Scott, Silas Scott's brother. So they were second cousins, and they moved to Kansas. Now we come to a set of gravestones with the name of Tabor. George, you can hardly see it, but that's George Washington Tabor. And his brother Andrew Jackson Tabor. Jesse Tabor married another Skinner sister to Holly Skinner Scott in Indiana. And in the Tabor family buried in Baldwin is Roger's grandparents. They're right there, George W. Tabor and Ella Gilmore Tabor. And of course he was the state senator from this area. This Mr. Tabor is Jesse and the son of Jesse Tabor and his wife was the Skinner, Lucretia Skinner. Well, he too moved to Baldwin. And he's buried there with his wife, James and Margaret. And now I'm going to put this down for a minute to show you a relationship. Everybody see this screen? So here we have, make this so everybody can hear me. By using Ancestry here, I can show you that lineage. See that he married Teresa Skinner was the name. And it's too hard, I'll continue my story. I know it by heart. So anyway, Jesse Tabor had a sister named Rebecca Tabor. Rebecca in Indiana married Samuel Scott, David Scott's half-brother, also a cousin. But anyway, I found on Ancestry that Jesse Tabor, Jesse and Rebecca were the sibling of an Indian maiden that William Tabor had taken in his wives 2 children that were sired by the Indian chief in the eastern United States. So that particular family of Jesse Tabor on down have Indian heritage in their blood. So to continue here, we move to a Hansen stone. Can you see that Julia Tabor is the daughter of the previous slide, James Tabor. And Julia Tabor married W.F. Hansen. Their daughter, Lillian, married Louis Peters in Baldwin, and that stone is in the cemetery. You really don't recognize who Louis is until, and this was their family. So what a beautiful family portrait of the Hansen family related to the Tabors. Louis Peters' grandparents are buried in the cemetery, and this is Louis' parents, Henry and his wife.
And Mrs.
Yeah, I have to remember her name. It's a funny name. But their daughter, you might recognize, is Olga Peters Hinchliffe, of which I believe the Historical Society have got records of her in the
Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame. So there we will be able to see the story of Olga Peters Hinchliffe and her husband, who also was state senator. And that's their headstone.
If I can interrupt, I actually got to go to their home in Baldwin. Charles and Olga, she gave piano lessons to my older brother.
And my mom did too.
Yep, I hear that. That's why it's so amazing. And she was a professional pianist in Chicago Conservatory for many years. And
We
to
have a
have
piece
her
of
buried
furniture
in the
from
Pence
their home.
Cemetery is an honor.
Now, that's that big house in Baldwin, right?
That's the big house in
Yep.
Baldwin that
The
leads
big
I
house.
think she was in the Coconut Care Center when I was there years ago. I'll go.
Okay. Yep. Alice here, her cousins also took piano lessons with Olga, and that's how I became acquainted with it. And that story developed because her cousins were the Berrichter family from Lost Nation. Well, the farm that I grew up on is the family Berrichter farm. So we were connected by that at one time. And so she started to tell me about playing piano in Baldwin for Olga Hinchliffe. And we ended up finding the story about another person in Jackson County that, in a different respect, is this Margaret Sieben. Margaret Sieben came to America in 1845, and she married a man about twice her age, Dietrich Sieben. And hopefully you can read that. They had 3 children, of whom all 3 children died before 1870, are buried in the Pence Cemetery. But that didn't stop Margaret. Her husband had died in 1861 and she lost her children, but she became still very successful and owned over 1,000 acres of land near the Baldwin area, as well as western Iowa. But how this story developed was that Alice's grandmother is Louise Sieben. And they had no idea they were even connected to this family buried in Baldwin until I showed them who they were. And her cousin Ruth had boxes and boxes of pictures to go through, and some were labeled and most of them weren't. We have been able to find out most of the people and create the family story for the Burgers, as well as the Bushes and the Sieben family. This particular woman was a member of the Lutheran Church, even though in Baldwin she congregated in Lost Nation. All of her funerals and services and things were in Lost Nation. But she built this beautiful home, which I understand is on the National Register of Historic Places. So I included that because
Where was that house?
in Baldwin,
North of Baldwin.
north of Baldwin.
Oh,
Isn't that where Joe Lechtenberg lives?
yes.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And we took a drive out there with the 3 Burger sisters that I know, which are all Alice's first cousins, and took a picture in front of the building built by their great aunt by marriage. And that story led us to another stone that happens to be in the Pence Cemetery called the Daniel Stone. And here we have Lydia, Groover, and Fred Daniel. Fred Daniel came to America in 1850, lived in Davenport, as so many Germans did, and then found his shirt tail way up here to Baldwin. Well, the reason for that was because he was working for a family called Friday in Davenport. And the Fridays' relatives married the Pence brothers. So he followed the path of the Pence as well and came. His brother, his sister, Ernestine Daniel, married Dietrich Sieben. Again, that is Alice's great-grandparents. So they did not know they had Siebens nor Daniels in the Pence Cemetery until Ancestry.com, through the use of that, was able to make that connection. But that's their roots. Lydia Daniel died in 1891. She died of lockjaw.
Oh.
And Fred Daniel continued living his life. He was the oldest person in Lost Nation in 1895. He died at the age, I believe, of 95. Other graves that we'll talk about on Saturday will be the Kokemuellers. Kokemuellers are related to the Bushes that were in this area, and they too are relatives of Alice. And I can't, let's see. This is Ida Pearl Scott. She is the daughter of Leif Scott. She married Bert Saunders. Some of you might be familiar with Lloyd. Lloyd and Roberta were on the board of directors of a historical society through the time Lloyd lived to be 100. And so many of you have your stories in this book, which I treasure. Lloyd and Roberta did not have any children. They lived out there actually in Jones County, right across the line. But he always came to our Scott reunions because his mother was a Scott, being a cousin to my grandfather. And the last slide I have, a lot of Bachs are buried in the Baldwin Cemetery. And let's see, Lois Bach, Lois Scott married to Bach. And we'll have more about that again on Saturday. So that's the end of my presentation for this part. We can go online with the other computer and look at Ancestry.com for anybody who's interested. Yes?
How, are you related to Winford Scott? That's how Scott County got its name?
No,
You are not.
no. Interesting tale. David Scott of our lineage, his mother was married to David Thompson. Before he was 1 year old, David Thompson died. And that was in 1796. So his mother was named Mary. Women could not keep children in those days without a spouse. So she gave David Thompson to her sister's husband, John Scott. And John Scott was married to Martha Larson, Mary's sister, and raised him until Martha died in 1806. Mary married John Scott, and they too had more children. And so that reunited mother and son, but not the father, but he took the name of Scott. And we don't have a bit of Scott blood in us except what would be by marriage and future generations on the Scott family. But his name was, we call him David Thompson Scott.
So basically, it's a different side of the family, and that's why you're not related to General Wilson.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. The family did continue to move together. So Samuel Scott in Illinois is down in Edgar County, Illinois. And Samuel Scott was married to Rebecca Tabor, who is the daughter of the Indian chief. So that whole line is just a fascinating tale. Like to learn more about it. But in moving to Baldwin, when they did in 1836, that other set of cousins came to Baldwin, as well as many other families from that area have settled in the Baldwin area. And again, the Tabors being one, Skinners were the other, Beers were another. There's another cemetery up at Baldwin called the Real Cemetery, which is on the farm owned by Jim and Shirley DeVore. There are 2 Scott children buried there who are the descendants of that Indian maiden. Yeah, Roger.
In regard to the only Tabors that I knew of were the George Washington and Andrew Jackson, and I always heard that they were twin. One of them had a twin brother that rode in on horseback to Baldwin. But I never ever heard of Jessie Tabor. How was she related to those boys?
Jesse is their father.
Oh.
Jesse is their father. And Jesse is half Indian.
Huh. Well, that's news to me.
And I will show you that on Ancestry. It's documented.
Wait till I tell my kid.
Oh, you're in, yes. I thought you would be interested in that because of that indigenous heritage, you have special rights in this country. Yeah, I was just shocked to find that story.
But again, Jesse was the father of those 2 twin brothers. Is that right? And where did they?
Let me look at Ancestry for you. I will change computers so we can put it on the big screen.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
I don't want to take people's time. It's not necessary.
No, because what I have to show you on the computer is it's on Find a Grave.
Okay.
And I did not do the research. It just happened to find it on Find a Grave, and I was just astonished by the story. And the story was written by a professor at the University of Toledo, Ohio. So it's a well-founded record.
So while one gal couldn't keep David because she didn't have a husband but the Native American family, she could keep her 2 sons.
those two were adopted. She gave them away until she
Oh.
married.
Oh, she did?
Yeah,
Oh,
I will show you the story.
thank you.
Yeah, I was just astonished by it. So,
Women's rights are so far right now. We dealt with this one When I need, yeah, that makes sense. I just don't have to be able to say so much too fast.
I wonder how many of
Yours
had something to say about you.
Full screen. It's full screen, right?
let's see, help me out. This won't do that. No, this isn't PowerPoint. This is live ancestry.
You're our full screen, excuse me.
I will read you the story. Rebecca Tabor was the daughter of Rebecca Snavely and the Indian named Bright Eagle. Later, Rebecca was adopted by William Tabor. Below is part of the prologue from the Family Tabor history book written by Rosemary Tabor Harlan. Sometime close to the year 1800, William Tabor was in the vicinity of Charleston, West Virginia, at the same time that the Tuscarora Indian tribe was preparing to move north to Canada for a large tribal meeting with other Indian tribes in Canada. The Indiana Magazine of History of March of 1951 relates a part of the history that includes William Tabor and Rebecca Snavely with her two children, Jesse and Rebecca, children of Bright Eagle, son of the chief of Tuscaroras, great chief of the Senecas. Miss Ruby Scott, professor of English at the University of Dayton, Ohio, verifies the adoption of the name Tabor by Jesse and Rebecca. My Rebecca Tabor was really the daughter of an English woman from the Palatinate area. Bright Eagle gave Rebecca and her two children to William Tabor, who was going to Kentucky. Rebecca had fallen into the hands of Tuscaroras. Bright Eagle sired two children by her before returning her to the white man. According to the Indiana census record, Jesse was born around 1795 and Rebecca, the daughter, was born about 1800. Consent had to be given for a marriage in Indiana in 1818. If Rebecca had been the beloved wife of Bright Eagle, as the article implies, there would have been one or more children born between the two before she returned with. Rebecca married Samuel Scott October 5th in Brownstown, Indiana. It mentions the name of their children. And that same month and year, David Scott married Holly Skinner, and Jesse Tabor married Lucretia Skinner, all the same time in Brownstown, Indiana.
Ironically, I have a granddaughter named Rebecca.
You can find this information, again, who want to read it, on Find a Grave.
On what?
Find a Grave.
You pay for that?
No, free. No.
Good.
Story that I know well, I'll continue to talking if you don't mind. I don't have to look at the computer to find it. When Mary Mary Larson was her name. Mary Larson had given David, her son David, to John Scott. She too remarried several years later to a man named Thomas Locke. And the Locke family have all moved to Baldwin here too. There are no descendants here, and I can't find any relationship buried in the Pence Cemetery, but on the census record you will find the family of the Lockes, and they are half-brothers to David Scott. There was a Abraham Locke and Amos Locke.
Can you see how Locke is?
And what I found interesting was in the descendant line that there was a Melvin Locke in the Baldwin area. He became a Methodist minister, and he was a Methodist minister in Monmouth. But he also traveled around eastern Iowa, and his last post was at the Clinton, Iowa Methodist Church. When he died there, they put his body on a train. They had 50 or 60 people attend his funeral, and they drove his body to Mount Vernon, and he's buried in the Mount Vernon Cemetery. But he married a lot of folks in Jackson County in eastern Iowa, a man named Melvin Locke. That would be a relative. I'm ready for questions. Anybody wants to ask about any Moorhead?
Moorhead.
Let me see what we can find.
Things we didn't know about Roger. Young girl's presentation.
Yes, that's right.
Which was James Tabor? How did he fit in? Was he in it?
James Tabor is the son of Jesse.
Okay.
James Tabor's grandmother was Rebecca. Oh, hang on a second. Was the other lady. Hang on, get it.
Well, they smoked a peace pipe once together. I think that's all a part of it.
I suppose there was a kid.
Yeah. I don't think there was no. I guess I could.
I got this stuff. Where you have
Do you know about how many bodies are buried in the Pence Cemetery?
I can tell you, well, Dennis, do you know?
Do you know how many graves there are in Pence?
Who's the,
No, I don't. No, I don't.
okay.
Find a grave that's on this.
Yeah. Fine. I will look at the number of graves that are on Find a Grave.
How would that be?
I do know that when Dad got back from the Navy, he dug a lot of graves there, and so did me and my brothers did grave openings there.
There are 677 matching records on Find a Grave. That doesn't mean they're all there. That's everybody's put them on. Find a Grave is a volunteer association to put headstones and markers and memorials on Find a Grave. Yeah. O-R-E-H-E-D. There are 20 Moorhead.
Well, there was a fatal auto accident in September of 1949. And I don't know if it was 5 victims that died in that accident. Cora Moorhead was one.
There she
died
is.
on September 10th, 1949. And not all of them died the day of that accident. but she had, I think, 3 sisters, and then one of the sisters' husband, Wilcox, was also a last name that were involved in that. It was a single car accident. One time it was, the most victims in one accident in Jackson County for a long time.
So I was just doing the Wilcox one.
Thomas Wilcox.
Yeah, and it was, what got me confused then was Mildred's husband's mother was a Moorhead, but she was also a Moorhead. So her mother-in-law had the same.
That's a lot. That was a car accident. Of course, no seatbelts.
Yeah, yeah, and I've got all that. Okay. But I'm saying that Mildred's husband's
Yes.
but Mildred's so her mother-in-law, so herself had the same
Here's some more stories.
On another note, I didn't mention was, a little bit, we have a book here printed here by Ergen Pendergrass. Ergen Pendergrass' wife is Marjorie Scott. She too is the roots in Pence Cemetery. Even though they're buried in Elwood, Marjorie is a Scott relative. And if anybody hasn't had a chance to read Ergen's book, it's a delightful story. You should read it.
I took a picture of it.
It's quite a story, especially in the Lost Nation, Elwood area.
Well, I'm gonna have a powwow. We're all invited. At the wigwam.
You think you can include the Tabor Winery in that story?
At the winery.
Yeah, at the winery. And of course, the other book you have here is Donald Wentworth's book. And that, again, is where I found a lot of the information for today's talk. It's amazing he printed this book. So, thank you for having me here and listening to my story.
Tell them again about Saturday.
Saturday, we will continue the story. If anybody wants to come to the Pence Cemetery, starting at 1 o'clock, and we'll stay until the powwow begins. And